My name is Keno Ferter. I'm working at the Institute of Marine Research and also at the University of Bergen, doing my PhD there. And I'm going to present the partner study, the one Tude presented, and go into the catch side, so what the people, the tourists actually caught. And then I'm also going into some follow-up studies which look at the release rates, and the amount tourists release, and also ongoing research what we are working on now. So I'm starting with the same slide just to make sure that there are no misunderstandings. This presentation and also tools was just about this part. So all of this we don't know anything about, pretty much nothing. I know, in the first presentation, you presented the data for the local domestic marine recreational fishers, but you said they are uncertain, and we don't know how good those data are. So, and in terms of catches, we don't know anything actually. So we are focusing on these 450 organized businesses, the ones that we introduced. So the problems are, we have this huge coastline, as Erwin said, the second largest in the world, and we have no registry of tourist landing businesses, so we don't know who they are, we don't know where they are. So one has to go into the net, one has to go into booking sites to actually identify those businesses. And there's no license, so you don't have any track on the anglers. You don't know how to contact them. You have to go via a certain access site, and in this case, those businesses were chosen. And then, as Tude said, many nationalities and many species. So it's not just trivial. You can have a questionnaire in maybe in German, in English, maybe in Russian, but then you don't have anything in Polish. You don't have anything in Lithuanian. So you're ending up with many languages. And I'm going into this later. I did some on-site interviews, and sometimes it was almost impossible to communicate. That's good. So it's not easy to do research there. So what they did in this study on the catches, this is the pilot study, but I'm looking into the 2009 study. So they chose, out of those 450, they chose 92 businesses where they distributed catch logbooks, and then one that was rotating every 6th week. So the tourists, they were self-reporting their catches, and then they could scale it up to the total sample of tourist businesses. And they ended up with an estimate of 3,300 tons, out of which half were Atlantic cod, which is quite a significant amount. And when we look into this part, which is probably much bigger, we would end up with a much bigger number than this. So this is definitely something one should look at. Species-wise, cod dominated the catches by far. I said half of the 3,300 cod. So, and what is interesting here is, you can't see the numbers, but the upper one it's both cod. The upper one shows north of 62 degrees. The other one south of 62 degrees. So you see the difference in catches there, or landings in this case. 1,580 tons were landed in northern Norway, and only 27 tons in southern Norway. So there's a huge difference. Looking at the same 820 tons landed in northern Norway by tourists, and only 200 tons in southern Norway. So, but still, those are the two main species. And then you have all the others, and I won't go into much detail. Just as a comparison, the commercial harvest of coastal cod, which is not to be confused with the sky, which was on the first picture in Øyvind's presentation, which is the Barents Sea cod, the coastal cod, which is living along the coastline and also in the fjords. That was around 25,000. So it's around, what would it be, 5 to 10% of the commercial landings. But that's the business sector of the tourism, so it doesn't include the local Norwegian recreational fishers. So what about catch and release? Because in this study only landings were recorded. There was nothing about releases. And when I came to Norway in 2009, so just when that study finished, And I asked, so what about the releases? And then I was to know that in Norway, there's a rule: what you eat, what you catch, you eat, and there's no release. And I said, there must be some release. No. There's no release. And I said, okay, then let's have a study and look into this. So we conducted a study in northern and in southern Norway. So I traveled picked the subcenter of those businesses to get a pretty big spread, and then I traveled to those places and just talked to the tourists, asked them what they caught, what they landed, looked at the catch, what they landed, and also asked them what they released. And sometimes the numbers were so high that they actually couldn't remember. They just said something between 50 to 200 fish, can't really remember. So yeah, so there were pretty high releases. And that's what I came back home with. The gray bars, they show northern Norway, and the white bars, they show southern Norway. And what you see is that for cod and saithe and also haddock, the release rates are over 60% in northern Norway. So they are very high. And what is also interesting is that for cod, there's not much difference between northern and southern Norway. But when you look at tusk and ling, there are still rather high release rates in the north, but very low release rates in the south. And a reason for this, again, are the rather bad catch rates in southern Norway. Because tusk and ling, they aren't very popular food fish. So since people get enough cod and halibut, which are the main target species, and also saithe in the north, they just throw a lot of tusk and ling in the sea again. While in the south, if you get a tusk or ling, you are happy, and then you take it. And the cod release rates in the south are mostly explained by small fish. So they were under the minimum size, or they were just too small to be taken. So otherwise, we would also have much lower, if the fish would have been bigger, much lower release rates there. So I presented proportions now, but what does it mean in numbers? In this study, which I showed in the first slides, where they estimated the landings, they estimated that 530,000 cod were landed in 2009. And if we apply this 66% release during the study, my interview study, then you end up with 1 million cod which were released, which is a really high number when you think about what they said before the study, that there's no release. And when we published those results, it went crazy on the media, and that also showed how important media is, because then we actually had the interest. Then suddenly this was a big topic in Norway. There were rather, what should I say, headlines which weren't very tabloid. So they just said, okay, 1 million cod are released, and fish are released. But we also, then there was an article, so they are ordered by a chronological order. Then they asked, the first time they asked, what about the survival? Do we know if the fish survive? And then one of the biggest Norwegian magazines, tabloid magazines, newspapers, they had the answer right away, and they said tourists are dumping 6 out of 10 cod. So suddenly we were not talking about release anymore, but we were talking about dead fish and discards. So this became a big issue in Norway, and a pretty big discussion. This is just a slide to show it in a European perspective. This is a result from the working group Kieran is leading, from the ICES working group. We had a review last 2 years ago, well, we initiated 2 years ago, we published it last year, where we collected the release rates for cod in all the European countries. So where we knew that they were dating it, we sent emails around and asked if people could contribute to this. And what we found was that the red is kept and the green is released. Then in Poland, all fish are apparently over the minimum size, pretty much all of them. So only 1% are released. In Germany and the Netherlands, around 1/4 is released. And in Sweden, 50-50. And UK, Denmark, and Norway, they have the highest release rates. And that can be explained by catch rates. As we said, many fish, then you're more tending to, you tend to release more fish. Or also voluntary attitudes, angler attitudes in the UK. Has been a long tradition for catch and release practice. So people tend to release more fish compared to countries where people tend to be very consumptive and like to eat the fish. So we found very low release rates. We also had different species, where sea bass, pollock, but I'm not going into detail now because of the time. But then the question is, what are the consequences for the fish? Do they survive? Do they have any sublethal effects? We discussed this, and there has been very little done in Europe. There's one study from Germany, there's one study from Iceland, but the Icelandic study is just looking at jigging machines, and where the German study, they actually looked at mortality rates caused by angling, but also only just one sector in the Baltic Sea. So I'm trying to look a bit more into detail now in the Norwegian ecosystem. We discussed that there can be large differences depending on water temperature, but also depth, which is a big issue in Norway. I could talk an hour about this, but so I just want to mention that we are working on this. When you take up a fish from deep water from 100 meters, it suffers barotrauma. The swim that expands. At some point it ruptures, and the fish gets gas bubbles in the blood. They get eye protrusion. They get stomach eversions. Quite a few things which can lead to mortality. So for that we're doing containment studies where we catch fish, where we use different factors, try to keep other factors constant. In this case, this summer we'll go to northern Norway where we will catch fish from different depths, try to keep everything else constant. Look into the effects of depth on mortality, where we also looked at hooking locations, compared fish hooked in the stomach to fish hooked in the lips, and found that fish apparently fish hooked in the belly are much more likely to die than fish hooked in the lips. But then, even if the fish survives, there's still this question. Okay, it's swimming fine, it looks alive, but what are the sublethal effects? You can have effects like altered foraging behavior, predator avoidance, spawning behavior, things which can which go beyond mortality, but which can still influence the life of the fish. So we had a telemetry study, which we're going to submit hopefully next week, and there we tagged fish caught with acoustic tags, and then released them, and then a few weeks later, after they had adjusted to the area, we went out with fishing rods and fished on these cod which were swimming around, and actually managed to recapture 9 of those fish, and then release them immediately again. So by doing this, we could separate the tagging effect, which took part a month before that, from the actual catch and release effect. So what we saw, we could get data from the fish, 24 hours or how long we wanted, how it swam before we caught it, because it was already in the system. Then we caught it, and then we could see how the behavior was altered from the catch and release event. And we've actually, all the 9 fish survived, but for 3 out of 9 of the fish, we could actually see that there was some impact. If you have questions on that, you can approach me afterwards, and I can show you some more graphs and go into more detail. So that was rather good news, and which should encourage also the distribution of best practice guidelines, because it shows that catch and release can work, but it only works if you promote best practice, introduce rules which anglers can use so that the fish has the best potential for survival. Thank you very much.
And I forget what they said, if Norway has these minimum size guidelines, but why are so many people throwing them back?
Because one reason is that people pay several hundreds of euros to go to northern Norway, for example, for a week, and then they catch the 15 kilo limit in the first hour maybe. So one way to react is to cut out the finest piece that's even set, and then you waste 90% of the fish. Another way is to be very selective and just take the perfect fish which you think is in the perfect condition, take that for food, and then the rest gets released.
Right, so they're selecting better fish.
Better fish, yeah, but also just to continue fishing. It's mostly, I would say, one of the main reasons is, the main reason they gave me is that the fish were too small. But too small can mean 60, 70 centimeters. And so the people are very selective on what they take, because they can be selective. Because you just have, you put down your lure and you get a fish. It's just like that. You can catch 50 fish in an hour. So,
quick question. Thanks for a nice presentation. The barotrauma, interesting. Any of the cod that you tagged and caught, were they showing any signs of barotrauma?
The ones we tagged in the acoustic telemetry study, they didn't show any barotrauma.
Okay, thanks.
But in the other study, I had this study already last year, but it went wrong because we didn't consider temperature effects. So this time we tried to keep this constant. And yeah, we had barotrauma signs, and but we had fish which had very strong, very bad barotrauma signs, which recovered completely from it. Which had bubbles in the blood, which had bubbles in the eyes, which had all fish from 20 meters and below have a ruptured swim bladder, which doesn't seem to be a problem for cod at all. It's healed after 10 days. It's no problem. But yeah, since we struggled with water temperature and air temperature, it was a very hot summer last year. We just have to repeat it because we held the fish at the surface, and just the sun was burning the fish away, and yeah. Yes.
I know we've talked about this a lot before, but I'm also interested in a lot of areas. They have, well, in Australia, they use various different methods for releasing fish. So they use release weights or cages to take the fish back down to depth before they release. They also some will pierce the swim bladder as well on release. And I'd be interested in how well those methods actually work, and whether we should be thinking about incorporating those in best practice guidance as well.
I have a video on that. I don't have it here on this laptop, but I can also show it to you if you're interested. I have a video where we used just a modified fishing hook, a jig hook with a big 300-gram weight, and then we had the hook without a barb, and then just put a line on it, and then we put it in the lip of the fish, just sang it down to where we caught it. I have a GoPro camera on top of it, and then you just pull on the line of the hook, and then the hook just unhooks and the fish can swim away because it gets recompressed.
It swims away, but you don't know the survival.
No, we don't know the survival.
So that's
That's a bit uninteresting.
Yeah. Did you?
Yeah. The term you use is, I think, no harm, or
The what?
when you release these fish, you say there's no problem. What was the term you use?
I don't know what I use.
Well, what I was getting at is that every fish you catch releases a huge amount of stress proteins, no matter what you do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a big physiological cost to that.
Yeah.
And the long-term effects, we don't know what they are, from mortality or predation or feeding or whatever. I think it's important what you're doing, but there is an effect. There's no effect level.
No, of course. I mean, I used the wrong term then. Maybe I should say fewer effects than, or lower effects than expected, maybe. Because, of course, every interaction with a fish probably pulling a lure through a lake, you see a pike escaping from the lure. The fish gets stressed in a way. But so the way I communicate these results is usually not to promote catch and release practice in a way, but not to work against catch and release either. So keep up minimum sizes and yeah, but don't encourage people not to do it at all. But people should be aware that yeah, you have to treat the fish in a way that yeah, you have to be aware that you have an effect, and so you have to treat it in a way that this impact gets as low as possible. And that's how when I go fishing, I don't practice pure total catch and release, but I have to be selective because I can't. If you take everything, you have to sell it more than 50. I'm not selling any fish, but you just end up with such a big amount of fish. But yeah, if you want to continue fishing, you just have to deal with it in a way. Otherwise, you have to stop fishing after 5 minutes. So it's really.
I just wanted to let people know, they don't have the website on me, but as part of our recreational fishing agenda for this past few years, I know fisheries, they had a big barotrauma workshop.
Yep.
They're doing this fairly recently, and they're coming out with some barotrauma guidelines, and they've got some cooperative research with some like charter captains that they're doing, so you might have already seen that, looked that up.
Yeah.
There's a fish health assessment you can do at the surface. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. I think it's called VTR. There's also one called RAMP.
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow, but there's these assessments you can do on these fish before you release them. And people have done studies to show that the assessment score, you do things like look at their reflexes or look at the amount that their swim bladder's swollen, and you're actually able to predict the chances that fish is going to survive. This has been done with redfish, I think, solely. But there are methods out there for anglers to assess pre-release what the odds of that fish are of actually surviving.
That's one rent is something which is really growing now.
Yeah.
It was introduced around 2000.
Yeah.
That was the first time he introduced it.
It came out of BC in 2007.
Yeah, yeah. And now it's swapping over into practice in recreational fishing research also, which is really nice because it's a really nice tool.
I'm going to spoil my talk.
Sorry. Yes? Okay. Yeah, you had another question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, if I would have stressed you out for 5 minutes, would you die?
No, I would probably be really scared.
Yeah.
It depends on what's chasing him.
Yeah. But, for a short period of time, big stress and,
But it's also important to realize that these fish are some of the best athletes in the world. They're very fit. It's not like, we can run a marathon and try to outrun a grizzly bear. They're doing it all the time, so they're pretty much in condition.
And I would probably prefer to be stressed for 5 minutes than being shot and just my back being cut out. It's really, I mean, it goes in philosophy into ethics. I mean, it's a big thing to discuss.
It's really amazing if you compare commercial fishery with those rules which apply to recreational fishery. It's completely different thing. You care about each single fish. If you go to commercial fishing vessel, it's a disaster. If you look at
I guess we will have more projects on monitoring survival rates when it comes to this mandatory bycatch problem.
I mentioned yesterday that some rules apply where you can expect that more species survive, they can deliver it, right? And so we certainly need more research on this.
Yeah, we discussed in this review paper, we discussed how these large amounts of release, how they can if they are in conflict with this discard ban. But since it says that we're not really sure if the discard ban, we discussed this last night, if the discard ban in itself really applies to recreation fisheries.
I don't think it does, because it's only if you have a landings obligation for a quota species. So there's no obligation for recreational fishers to land their catch or to report landings. So therefore, I don't think these are classified as discards. That's my understanding.
And
So what I said was that now we have it for the commercial fishermen. We don't know. They will not talk about percentages. But let's say they one day find out that 10% is okay mortality rate. Then somebody,
of course,
green organization, might say, hey, we have pike studies, we have cod studies, Atlantic cod studies, showing that the anglers' mortality rate is around 20. So how can we allow commercial fishing and not look into recreational fishing? So that's, but for now we are not part of the CFP, we are not under those kind of rules.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add to that though, of course, that already the commercials are talking about, well, what about your fishing, and pointing the fishing at us at BSROC meeting, among others. And also I was just wondering, because the salmon is part of the, is going to be part of trolling fisheries, the commercial trolling fishery will be part of the management plan that might be included in the discard ban.
I think in Germany they discussed
Commercial.
taking up salmon for recreational fisheries too, but then they took it out again because they expected that survival can be quite hard. So there's, I mean, in Norway they changed the marine resource law just now a couple of months ago, where they have Skagerrak as the first region to introduce the discard ban, and they said, okay, all fish has to be landed except, I just checked it, except fish caught in pike nets. That was what was standing there. So then I contacted them and asked, so that means from now on all minimum landing sizes for recreational fisheries are ineffective? Does that mean that everything has to be taken? And then they said, they replied immediately and said, oh, we forgot angling in this law. So they actually changed it. So now it says everything has to be landed except fish caught in pike nets. But it there just says except fish caught in pike nets, and fish which is under or which is against regulate or which is regulated and under the minimum size and caught on angling gear. But it says it says that fish which is over the minimum size caught on angling gear has to be taken. If you take it really on the so.
But it's clear this is something we will lobby to, so we are not caught wrongfully on that one. And there will be much more talk about this because it's all a mess for the time being.
Also wanted to say one of the things, some of the stock assessment they did on Atlantic cod this past year, they had to go back and change the stock size because they severely underestimated the mortality. So then for the amount of recreational catches they allowed in order to they had to cut it back a lot, and that caused a huge spike.
Is it the US where they use 100% mortality in the assessment?
Well,
Maybe it's Canada.
Every stock assessment they do differently, but what I'm saying is that they had an old stock assessment they were using, and then they went back and redid it, and they had underestimated the mortality, so then they had to scale back all the limits on commercial direct fishing, and all the people in New England got very upset about that.
Like to make a final question about commercial fishing, like just something which has been passing in my mind, like possible for a commercial fisher when he catches a big amount of fish, like kill all those fish immediately, so that commercial fishing could also be ethically correct for the fish that is possible to get killed, or do they have to suffer?
I think at the moment it's not. parallel to salmon and aquaculture, they do really individually.
They have to.
Yeah, so they have to from an ethics perspective, but it's a big can of worms that hasn't been opened. That's all it is to discuss.
There is no technological solution.
Depends on how many you get. With a big seine, and you get a ton of fish, maybe 4,000 fish. It's, huge net. But both salmon, troll salmon, and live tuna are killed Sublethal on board. That's to protect the quality. It's not for ethics.
Yeah, good to know. Hope there will be some solution one day. Yeah. Sure. Perhaps evolution will teach this required. All right. Now, thank you very much. That was